All right, guys. I really excited to share to you that you're gonna watch amazing talk from Peter about how you can really speed up your development using Scratch Org Snapshots. It's gonna be awesome. I'm absolutely confident that it will be very interesting, and I'm sure you're gonna have something new today. So that you can get it and try to apply to think about it for your projects and future projects. So again. Have a good time and have fun, Peter. The mic is yours.
Thanks, Ruslan. Let's see. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, I can.
Awesome. Let's go. Welcome to this presentation about Scratch Org snapshots. First of all, just a quick disclaimer here. So we haven't actually implemented the Scratch Org snapshots in our daily work, but this is the result of all my research and deep dive into the functionality. And the reason why we haven't implemented it is because of a limitation. I will come to that one. Um, but hopefully, even though we haven't implemented it, we will have some insights that hopefully is useful for you if you try to implement this on your own. So the opinions here are my own, and they may not directly suit your DevOps requirements, but hopefully they might have some value after all. So a quick look at the agenda. Very simple one. We're going to deep dive into or have a short introduction about what are the Scratch Org snapshots before we deep dive into the opportunities and the limitations that comes with it. We're going to also have thorough benchmarking of the Scratch Org snapshots versus Scratch Orgs, as well as having some discussion points if we have the time for it. And of course, relevant links at the end. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a Salesforce architect at Sopra Steria, based in Norway. I have 3+ years experience with Scratch Orgs, packaging, flexible, and DX in general. I'm currently working at a project creating a new applicant experience solution. So both admissions and an applicant experience at BI, Norwegian Business School. So I'm usually I will look like I'm on the picture now, but today I've just got a newborn child, 4 weeks old. This is my new life now. I don't have that much time on this presentation as I wanted, so it might be some wall of text, a bit, hopefully not too complicated or hard to follow the flow, but take that in mind. I wasn't able to perfect the presentation. Shortly about my employer, Sopra Steria. We're one of the leading European corporations in digital transformation, the top 5 European providers of digital services. It's based headquarters in Paris. We're spanning over 30 countries and 56,000 employees, 300 of which are working in the Salesforce ecosystem, and 70 of us is working in the Scandinavian offices, working across different industries, different of the clouds that Salesforce provides, and in different sectors, among those, the higher education, which is the project I'm based on now. So without further ado, let's have a quick introduction to the Scratch Org snapshots. But before we can really deep dive into Scratch Org snapshots, we need to introduce the Scratch Orgs. So not everyone may be familiar to the Scratch Orgs. So let's have a short recap. I'm not going to go into very much details of Scratch Orgs, but a briefly reminder of what it is. So everyone is probably knows about the sandboxes. And the difference between the Scratch Orgs and the sandboxes is that the sandboxes you have to create from an environment. You have to clone it from a sandbox, or you have to create it from a production org. It's not possible to create an empty sandbox. And that's where these Scratch Orgs come in, because you can then create the empty development environments, which are short-lived, disposed of by Salesforce. And at the heart of all of this is the Salesforce CLI. And for the Scratchworks, they're fully configurable, same as for the sandboxes. And you can enable almost any feature or setting as specified by a JSON file. So there shouldn't be any major discrepancies in the feature parity between the Scratchworks and the sandboxes. And there's not really Scratchworks versus sandboxes for development. For me, that's a false dichotomy. We don't need to dive into that one because you still need sandboxes for the static environments for testing, and Scratchworks will enable you to go for source-driven development because since it's short-lived, it literally forces you to pull down the changes from the Scratchworks and store it somewhere else, for example, in source control. So with that ado, what's the problem with Scratchworks then? Why do we need the Scratch Org Snapshots? Well, the problem is that it takes a lot of time to make it production-like, given that it's created empty. So that's where the Scratch Org Snapshots come in. So I've taken a short quote from the Trailblazer group for Scratch Org Snapshots. So a Scratch Org Snapshot, it captures the state of a Scratchwork so that you can use it to quickly spin up new Scratchworks. And by state, we mean then the metadata, the data, the features and settings, and also the install packages. And by that, I would usually refer to App Exchange. So our managed or unlocked packages that extend our code base and the functionality of our production org. So as inferred by the name, the Scratch Org Snapshots, they can only be used for Scratch orgs, not sandboxes. And they should not be confused with Scratch Org shapes. So Scratch Org shapes, they only retrieve the features and settings from production. It has nothing to do with the metadata or the data. And for those who don't know about metadata, that is the object definitions, the Apex classes, the Lightning Web Components, all of the configuration on the platform. So yes, Scratch Org shapes, you would basically take that file that I shown you, the JSON file, and it would comprise that into this instead. So you don't have to manually update and maintain the list of features and settings that you want enabled in the Scratch org. You would basically point to your dev hub, which is most likely your production org, and say, hey, I want the features and settings from that one. So that doesn't have anything to do with the metadata and data. So that in that way, Scratch Org shape complements Scratch Org Snapshots. So how would the typical development lifecycle be for Scratch Org Snapshots? And from now on, we're going to go into a lot more detail. If the Scratch Orgs itself was a bit too complicated, please check out Scratch Orgs and also packages and come back and rewatch the webinar once that is more fully understood. So the process is that you create the Scratch org with the features and settings that you need enabled, given the JSON file, the product scratch def.json, or using the Scratch org shape. Then you install all the external dependencies. So for example, the Marketing Cloud Managed package, or external framework packages like the Trigger Actions framework or the Nebula Logger framework or a Feature Flag framework. And then you insert the data because all of these can be copied. So if this is an initial Scratch org empty, you fill it up with your base dependencies, your base data, features, and settings. And now, once you have done this, you don't have to do it again. You create an image of that Scratch org. So that means that all your other Scratch orgs you're going to create, if you refer to that snapshot, those features and settings and those App Exchange or external packages and data will always be available in your next Scratch orgs that you create from this snapshot. So you basically just refer to that snapshot when creating the next Scratch org, and everything then will be pre-installed. So a very important note here, because this depends on whether you have started to modularize your code base or you have started to get control over your dependencies. So this is a quote from the documentation of the Scratch Org Snapshots, in that a snapshot is intended to contain only the static dependencies and not the entire configuration of your org. It's supposed to be all the dependencies that don't change that often. So based on that, I've created 3 types of categories. These are my own, not defined by Salesforce. And as you can see, Salesforce doesn't recommend creating everything in one snapshot, but we're having the base snapshot. And what that means is, just as I shown you earlier on the previous slide, it would be the managed and unlocked dependencies. For our project, that is 13 managed packages and 6 unlocked packages. And of course, setting up a commerce web store and then creating data. And those are for the standard and managed objects. So the limitation in a way for this base snapshot is that you can't really insert all the data you need. You can create it for accounts, products, opportunities, contacts. But since you in this snapshot haven't uploaded or deployed your whole data model of custom objects and such, you're not able to actually insert all the data that you want. So based on your project, if you're already started to modularize, maybe you have a structure of your code base or packages where you have a data model base package, then perhaps you can try and mess around with having a base snapshot with your data model, because that would enable you to actually insert most, if not all, the data needs that you want in that Scratch Org snapshot. And finally, full snapshots. That really means the whole repository, a production-like image that you can create your Scratch Orgs from. So let's go into what would be the snapshot lifecycle of all of these. First, you would have the base snapshot. You really don't need to update the snapshot unless an external dependency changes. So let's say Jonathan changes on his Nebula Logger project. Okay, then maybe if it's relevant changes, update, create a new Scratch org, update the Nebula Logger version, and then create a new snapshot based on that one. You also need to do it every Salesforce release. For the base snapshots with data model, you would probably add the point where your data model changes, maybe more significant changes, and then you might update it more frequently than that, maybe daily or weekly. I haven't talked too much about full snapshots. I will come back to it, but what I suggest is more of a daily update. And by update, I actually mean deleting the snapshot and creating a new one. So without further ado, introduction to the snapshots and the type of categories that I have boxed them into, let's jump into the different opportunities. So first, the Scratch orgs. What would this mean for our Scratch org provisioning, and what would it mean for manual setup steps? So as mentioned earlier, how long does it take us to provision a Scratch org really is an important indicator of using Scratch orgs versus sandboxes or other types of development. So for reducing, we have 2 categories where I see the opportunities. The first is reducing a Scratch org provisioning time, where I would really emphasize on the difference between a creation, i.e. when it's available, you can log into it, and versus the provisioning, how long until everything is set up in your Scratch org for development. And the other opportunity we'll go into is the removal of manual steps. So we'll have a lot of benchmarking. I've had some automated jobs running around for a couple of weeks now, creating Scratchworks, both regular Scratchworks and snapshot Scratchworks, and trying to benchmark how much time we can save on our daily operations in our team. So for the average Scratchwork, takes around 40 seconds to 2 minutes. And of course, as mentioned earlier, this would be empty, only features and settings as specified when you create the Scratchwork. Then you needed to install all of those managed unlocked dependencies, all those 13 managed packages, the 6 unlocked packages, setting up the commercial web store. All of that for us today takes around 30 to 35 minutes. So creation time, let's say approximately 1 minute, provisioning time, 30 to 35. And this is just a base Scratchwork. We haven't deployed our APIs classes, our objects, Lightning Web Components, the user access policies, whatever. This is still not any of our configuration of our environments. And if we compare that to if we create a Scratchwork for 30 to 35 minutes, we now create a snapshot of that Scratchwork, and we then create what I call a base snapshot Scratchwork. We go from a 30 to 35 provisioning time to around 8 minutes. So that just saves up 22 minutes. And you see there are some outliers, but it's pretty consistent for 100 Scratchwork creations throughout the day. I also added for the full Scratchwork, just to let you know how much time it takes for us today. It takes around 1.5 to 2 hours to install all of our dependencies, setting up the commerce web store, deploying all of our metadata, and then seeding all data that we need. If I then, once that's finished, I create an image or a snapshot of that Scratchwork, and the next Scratchwork that I create based on that snapshot takes 8 to 15 minutes. It's a huge time saver already for that. We'll come back to the full Scratchworks or the full snapshot Scratchworks and what their usages are. Because even though this is a huge time saver, there might be some asterisks to how you can actually utilize those. So the other part is as I mentioned with Scratchworks, is also to remove the manual steps, because once everything is installed or deployed, there might be some steps that it's not possible to automate or to deploy using the command line. Among these might be the stuff that is not supported by the metadata API, for example, the org-wide email addresses, and let's say features, either Salesforce features or App Exchange packages who have a guided setup. Previously, people will solve this by using Google Puppeteer, having like complex processes just to have this set up in Scratchworks. This is actually, once you have set this up in a Scratchwork and created a snapshot of it, the org-wide email addresses will be available in those snapshot Scratchworks. The same with other manual steps that you might have done. For example, config in setup. So let's do some profiles, Apex, classes, and debug log levels, for example. So you don't have to do this every time you provision a new development environment. And for your information, also the external credentials, I tried to mess around a bit with that one as well. So the tokens are not copied, obviously, but it seems like they are. So if you try to actually utilize them, you'll see that you will have an invalid token copied. The next is what are the opportunities for flexible users and for flexible adopters using Scratch Org Snapshots. First, a quick introduction of flexible. We don't have time to deep dive into this feature or into the framework, but it's shortly, it's an opinionated Salesforce DevOps framework. They have really good documentation. Really recommend everyone going there for a thorough introduction. We don't really need a detailed understanding of Flexible to discuss the benefits of Scratch Org Snapshots. Here we have a high-level overview over the different features that they provide. But the only parts of this feature catalog that Scratch Org Snapshots really will impact is the pooling feature. And the pooling feature, especially prior to Scratch Org Snapshots, is a really powerful feature that helps alleviate the problems of making production-like ready environments. As mentioned earlier, it takes us 1 to 2 hours to provision a fully set up development environment. But the Scratch Org pools helps us pre-provision our Scratch Orgs. So create them either at midnight or throughout the day, so we can then just in time get a fully provisioned Scratch Org, as opposed to just in time creating an empty Scratch Org and waiting for the setup to take place. So for us, we're actually using up to 100 to 200 Scratch Orgs every day to save our development and validation significant time. We get a Scratch Org, everything installed within seconds, and we can also push changes within a couple of minutes. But the obvious question then is why do we need Scratch Org Snapshots when we have these readily available environments after a couple of minutes? And the reason for that is those automated jobs to provision these Scratch Orgs, they may fail. Then you have to fix up in those failures and wait maybe 1 to 2 hours until new environments are provisioned. And in that time, you don't want your developer to not have an environment that he can work on, or having 1 to 2 hours downtime for our validations. So in that case, you could utilize a full snapshot backup. As mentioned, you could have a lifecycle where you create those daily, and then you have that as a backup in case this provisioning fails. In addition, there is an existing flexible functionality, which is coincidentally called the snapshot pool, where you create your pool in separate stages. So here you could actually swap out that feature, having all the Scratch Orgs you provisioned. Go, for example, for us, it would take from 1 to 2 hours to 30 minutes to 1 hour instead. So dramatically reducing maybe up to 50% of our provisioning. The next or third topic that would have a significant changes is the package version creation. We'll see that especially there will have major impacts, I would believe. But first, a quick introduction to packages. Again, I'm not going to take a really deep dive into the core details. Please review the documentation. There's a lot better documentation than I can provide here in this short amount of time. And read up on this topic before diving into the deep details together with me. So very short, you could view the unlock packages. Those are versioned immutable artifacts or a container of metadata. And it's used to move metadata then between environments. Instead of using change set sfdx deploy, you use a package container of metadata instead. We use it to break down the monolith org, everything installed. You don't know how everything interacts, into more composable parts and getting control over our dependencies. So short quote from the well-architected framework that achieving packageability should be the ultimate goal for nearly every Salesforce org. And what basically that means is, in short, you go from this force app structure into some containerized modules of metadata. And then once you usually start small, and then you go really modular, as we have done in our in the BX project. So before you can get this versioned immutable artifact of container metadata, you need to specify what is actually belonging into this artifact. And that is where Salesforce come in and provides what is called a build org. So a build org, it's a special Scratch org. You use it for the validation of that package. You provide the metadata you want to validate. You specify the dependencies that this metadata belongs to or depend on. And then it tries to compile your metadata and also run the runtime checks. That's the Apex tests. So I also want to link to David Reed. He has a really good series of build org articles. Highly recommend going in there. So a quote from him is that for the process of creating a package version, you first deploy your source to the build org, and your artifact is uploaded from that build org. And after that, the build org is disposed, and you don't have any interaction other than sending your metadata and specifying what features and settings you want to enable in that build org. So in general, you cannot access that build org. So to get a better understanding of what Scratch Org Snapshots means for build orgs, we have to break down the package version creation. And on the client side, we will usually break it. You can see this when running the sftx command, these kind of steps that it will follow you through before you get a package version back as a result. So the first step is the initializing step, in which a builder is provisioned by Salesforce. And next is the verifying features and settings, where it actually enables the features and settings that you have specified for that build org. Then it installs the dependencies that you said this metadata depended on before going to the verifying metadata state, where it deploys your source and then it runs the Apex test, the runtime checks for your package version, for your package. If everything's correct, if everything compiles of your metadata, if all the tests run green, then you are rewarded with a package version, unique versioned artifact that you now can use to install and move that metadata between environments. So with these steps in mind, let's go in through some more benchmarking. This is the package creation for one of our more core packages. Only has two dependencies. It's the Nebula Logger framework and the Tree Reactions framework. And here we're using a regular package build, a regular build org. We're not using snapshots. And as we can see that the step that takes the most time is the verifying dependencies in red. The initializing in yellow here takes around 2 minutes, not that much of a time to provision the build org from Salesforce, and then enabling the features and settings. After then installing the dependencies for 4 minutes on average, and then verifying the metadata. That's both deploying and running the tests. So on average, taking around 8 minutes, 7.5 to 8 minutes to get a successful package version back. So what Scratch Org Snapshots do is you will see that the verifying features and settings and verifying dependencies stages, they will just vanish, because that's what snapshots then provide is a build org with every feature and setting installed and the dependencies you have provided. So it's only 2 steps now. It's provisioning that snapshot Scratch org and then verifying the metadata. But as you can see, we'll also benchmark those together. The initializing step goes spikes compares to the regular Scratch org. So if we then compare that to each other, you can see that initializing goes from around 1.5 minutes on average to up to 8 minutes on the right-hand side on the snapshot. You can see that on the left-hand side, the verifying features and settings and verifying dependency steps are gone. But that performance boost is basically eaten up by the provisioning of the build org. So for smaller packages, using snapshots for package version creations may not give you that much of a performance boost. But I also ran this test on one of our packages. Yeah, it's average here is 7.5 minutes, and average for the snapshot, it's 10.5 minutes. So 3 minutes longer using the snapshots, even when disregarding the dependencies and features and settings. But we also ran this on our packages with a lot more dependencies to see if could we get some performance boost there instead. On the right-hand side, you can see a lot more dependencies. The education data architecture, the marketing cloud package, packages take really long time to install as part of the dependencies. As you can see here, it's almost all the time for this package version creation is stuck on the verify dependency step. And when instead using the snapshots, having all of these static dependencies installed, we go from that, we reduce that verifying dependencies significantly, as we can see on these graphs, and leaving the initializing as the main, the stage that takes the most long time. And if you compare them, we see that the verifying dependencies has gone all the way from almost 30 minutes on average using a regular build and to 6 minutes using our snapshot build. But again, the initializing step goes from around 1 to 2 minutes to 8 minutes. Even though this initializing takes more time, we see that we actually reduce our package creation in half. So this is a really, really important, really valuable usage, for us at least, for the Scratch Org snapshots. So summarizing, if you have a package with a low number of dependencies, that could be unlocked or managed packages that don't take that much time to install as a dependency. Scratch Org snapshots might actually be slower in creating a new package version for you. But if you have packages with larger number of dependencies, in our experience, maybe 3, 4, or more than that, then Scratch Org snapshots gradually actually becomes faster than using a regular package version build. The other thing that I discovered in January when I did the deep dive was that sometimes when creating a snapshot Scratch Org, it was provisioned between 10 and 20 seconds. I also took like a screenshot here all the way down on the right. You can see that it took like 15 seconds. Usually it took, this is a Bix or the first package that I benchmarked, taking around average 7.5 minutes. Let's say for sometimes it took 4 minutes, sometimes 8, sometimes 10, and then suddenly 15 seconds. And I think this could be, I'm just guessing around. There is no documented feature for this, but hopefully in the future, given that these static images, we could see that these images perhaps could be pre-provisioned and not just in time provisioned by Salesforce. And this also applied when using an unlock package. I haven't been able to recreate it now in March. So maybe they stopped pre-provisioning, or maybe there was a lot free time on the servers. I don't know, but at least those were very interesting. Trying to hopefully that we could reap a reward of such an improvement of the Scratch Org snapshots. But again, not documented. It's just something that I picked up on quite randomly. One question that I ask myself is that, well, we have defined dependencies as not only managed packages or package versions. We also some of our framework packages, for example, Trigger Actions Framework and Nebula Logger, we maintain them ourselves. We don't specify those as package version dependencies, but we have the metadata in our repository. So then I was messing around with, okay, what happens if I, in my snapshot, when I create the Scratch Org basis for that snapshot, what happens if I install a package versus deploying the metadata. And you actually get some differences. What you will see is that if you don't install it as a package, Salesforce actually runs for the package version creation all the non-package tests. It uses the run all local tests flag or specification on Apex tests, which means that you can actually get, as you see here, as we got Apex test errors in the verify metadata step for your framework or external packages. So not part of the package that you actually want to validate. So that means that if you actually want a performance boost, you should list all your dependencies or external dependencies at least as package version or install them as package versions instead of just deploying them. Other than that is that you have basically, if you use snapshots for package version creation, that means that every time you create a build org, you would have your logger, your framework packages, your marketing cloud packages, all of them will be installed regardless of which package you're trying to validate. So is it then necessary to specify them, as you can see on the right-hand side, or should you just remove them because they're really not dependencies because you have them in your build org? As we can see here, there's really no difference. I ran tests, many runs you can see here, 160 runs on both of them, and I see no major difference in performance in listing the dependencies versus removing them. But again, I would really argue that the point of the dependencies list is to have control over dependencies that this package required. So not only that, not only to specify what should be installed in build org, even though it's installed in build org, you should list it just so you have control over, oh, I actually depend on this type of metadata for this package. And the reason for actually checking those against each other was to check, does Salesforce actually, when listing dependencies, do they actually try to install EDA or Marketing Cloud, even though it's pre-installed in the snapshot? And that's what I discovered. No, they actually don't. So you can still list all those dependencies and you won't risk having a much longer running package version creations versus removing them on the left-hand side. Then we're going to come back to the same opportunity that we have for the Scratchworks for the package version creations. Because a very important information or line or truth that has been for a long time is that you cannot modify the build org. When you send your information to that build org, Salesforce governs everything. You're not able to log in or do any manual steps. That's not possible at all. So that means that we need to, when we say modify the build org, we need to also differentiate between the compile time dependencies, that is the installing of our dependencies and deployment of our source, our metadata that we want to validate, versus the runtime dependencies, which is what's available when you run your Apex tests. So before the Scratch Org Snapshots, we only had the features that were available in the SFTX project.json and the features and objects settings, settings and object settings that you could enable in the build org. Salesforce also enabled some attributes like the seed metadata to handle standard value sets. That will also come with a new package metadata access in the summer 24 release. Those are compile time, or those are more features that will help us to actually manipulate the build org for compile time dependencies. So it's more it's easier for us to actually validate or compile the metadata that we want to validate. And we also had some features for the runtime dependencies. We have the unpackaged metadata to allow us to deploy some type of metadata before running the Apex tests. And we also have the Apex test access. But given the introduction of Scratch Org Snapshots, now it's not really true anymore that you cannot modify the build org. Because with Scratch Org Snapshots, you could basically include whatever you want. You could say that some stuff that was not able to add in a builder before, for example, org-wide email addresses. If you had flows that tried to fetch these org-wide email addresses, you couldn't package them because it was no way you could actually have an org-wide email address in your build orgs. Now you can. You can you can create a Scratch org, set up an org-wide email address, and then create a snapshot on that. And once you use that snapshot for builds, that org-wide email address will be available. The same could be used for other metadata that's not supported. For example, before Spring 24, external credentials, you couldn't package those. That meant you couldn't package name credentials because they refer to external credentials. And also, for example, manage metadata, which you can't package, but you can have references to and references to the values in those example pick list values. And now you can actually manipulate that pick list in the snapshot before you create a build org and package version. And of course, if you can do this compile time, you can do everything also for runtime dependencies. But as with everything with great power, you should have a very good control over what you try to add to this list, to your build orgs, because you can really mess up stuff if you don't have control over what you try to add or lose control over dependencies or what you're actually trying to validate. Also, what we could do is, let's say, external dependencies before, if you added too many, that means that your Scratch org provisioning time, your package version creation time significantly could increase. But now, given the snapshots, maybe the more the merrier. Maybe the bar is considerably lower for using third-party packages for package-based development. Because now the reduction in or the increase in package creation time isn't that significant anymore. So let's run into the limitations, both for the Scratch org and package versions. One of those, for the snapshot at least, are you can only create a maximum of 5 daily snapshots. And you can also only have 5 active at any time. That means that you don't have, if you have a really complex repository with a lot of packages, you can't try to maintain a snapshot for each and one of them. The snapshot only lasts for 30 days, but for summer 24 release, that will be included or increased to 90 days, which means that you basically would have a snapshot available between each release. Because remember, you can't, once the new release has come, you have to upgrade or change, delete the snapshot and create a new one. And that's because once you created a snapshot, you cannot change it. You can't log into it, make some more changes. You have to delete it and create a new snapshot because it's a static image of the Scratch org. So you can still delete the Scratch org that you originally used to create a snapshot, and the snapshot will still be available. And that means that you have to be aware that since you can't change the snapshot, that actually has some impacts on the data, because then you can't regularly update your data from external services or otherwise. Another thing is that you can create a snapshot of a snapshot that was more relevant when the snapshot only lasts for 30 days. Perhaps you could create a snapshot Scratch org and then try to create a snapshot of that again, but that's not supported at all. And it makes sense. You might run into errors having a copy of a copy of a copy and so forth. You can't use the Salesforce limited access for now with snapshots, but they will fix that for the summer 24 release. Again, safe harbor talking for Salesforce. And there might be some timeouts, of course, creating the Scratch orgs. Then we're coming to the main limitation for us. This is the reason why we haven't been able to create or implement Scratch org snapshots. and that's that the snapshot Scratch Org doesn't support the language attribute. And for those who don't know, the language attribute is needed if your Scratch Orgs are creating it in a different language than you want. It's based on your DevHub sign-up country, which is not it's not possible, or we'll come back to that if it's possible to change or not. But this means that your Scratch Org will be created in the wrong language. You're not able to override those snapshot Scratch Orgs for now. And this creates issues for us for package creation, at least. For example, profiles or standard profiles will change their name. Object definitions suddenly become invalid, and we can't package translations because suddenly the orgs are created in the same language as we have translations, and so on. So this is the main blocker for us in adopting the Scratch Org snapshots. So as mentioned, what defines the Scratch Org's language, I've used a lot of time trying to figure that out. The documentation says from Salesforce says that it's the locale. Somewhere it says it's the DevHub language, but none of those are correct. It's actually the sign-up country ISO code, as you can see here. And unfortunately, as they say here, we're not able to actually change the sign-up country. So that means that we're locked. Salesforce support themselves says they actually don't want to do it because they can make our package versions fail. But unfortunately, this will be fixed Safe Harbor. Salesforce says that it's going to start supporting it from the winter 25 release. So until then, we're basically blocked from adopting this functionality. Of course, there might be other limitations since we haven't implemented them yet. There might be many other errors that we haven't run into, haven't uncovered. And if anyone has run into other errors, I heard that there might be some errors related to the price book and price book entries. Please let us know on the Trailblazer group, and so we can have those fixed before the general for the Scratch Org snapshots are generally available. So it seems like we're doing okay on time, Ruslan. No questions coming in. We have reached the open discussion.
Yeah, there was one interesting question. I believe we've got two answers, but I anyways want to ask you. Maybe you have a bit different opinion. So Kinesis asks what is your view on removing Scratchworks pooling altogether and only using snapshots instead? He says that personally, I think the whole Scratchwork pooling thing creates too much overhead and can cause the work to hit the Scratchwork creation limit.
We can jump into that one. I actually have it listed as one of those open discussions, so I can quickly go to that one. So that's also it's a really good question. I'll skip over if the Scratch Org snapshots will remove the need for sandboxes and jump to the pooling. So what my view of that is, I thought about that as well. Can we now stop having this really or semi-complex process in provisioning these Scratch Orgs every night or throughout the day? But the problem is the Scratch Org pools or snapshot itself. If you want to create a full snapshot, you need to have the ability to recreate your Scratch Orgs from the ground up. That means having an empty Scratch Org, installing all of your external dependencies, and deploying your metadata in correct order. And if you're not able to do that, then you can't create a Scratch Org snapshot. And what I basically went through there was the creation of a Scratch Org pool, right? You need to have the ability, or you need to recreate your Scratch Orgs from scratch. So that means you having a catch-22 there. You can't really remove the pools because those will be after each change or master. Your snapshots will be gradually non-production-like after each change, and that's what Scratch Org pools really is. Not the value is not only having the provisioning of Scratch Orgs readily available. It's also you have verified that your application actually builds and compiles and it works. So that's what my view on this is that you can't really remove it. You will get other errors down the line if you remove it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that totally makes sense. Totally makes sense for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think,
I guess, yeah, I guess there's no other questions as of now.
yeah. And it was
Yeah,
a lot of information. I hope people were able to at least partly follow my trail of thought. And of course, this webinar is available to view after this. And so you can come back, reference if you have any questions. Maybe I've answered them here. And if something wasn't clear, maybe read up on Scratch orgs or packages and come back and rewatch the webinar.
yeah, totally. It was very helpful for me. I mean, I also started to think about snapshots now. Still, like, I really need to compile that in my head. How can I combine that with pools? Because we have a lot of uh, dependencies and like other services uses our organizations like Scratch works a lot for every CI validation.
Hmm.
So I think it will take a lot of time to, go through this and understand how they can play together. But I believe that they will be beneficial, especially I think after the beta, maybe they will even mm, get it better. I
Yes,
think Wuha
improve the
has,
provisioning time, right? Because now many of our packages, if you have done packages well, you don't have too many dependencies. And then if you've done your job too well, maybe Scratch or snapshots might not be that useful. But if you have a lot of dependencies and you do rely on a lot of third-party packages, then it might give you a lot of value. But yeah, I fully agree with you. You have to see. I think the correct approach is how can the snapshots complement and improve our pooling and also our package validations.
yeah, totally. So we have another question, by the way. I think
Yeah.
it will be the last one. Wuha asks, from your current experience, was it the percentage of total storage size, so around 200 megabytes, and file storage 50 megabytes, have you consumed prior to doing the snapshots? Um,
So if it's
I'm
if
not,
that limits were too low, is that basically the question?
yeah, something like this.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
that's very important to note that the snapshot limitation on files and storage, it's the same as for regular scratchers. So there's no difference on those limits. And the 200 megabyte data limit, that's the same for a Developer Pro sandbox. The Developer Pro sandbox has a bit more storage on files, but there's really no difference for the storage limits for snapshots or scratchworks or sandboxes. So no, we haven't run into those problems yet. For all of our scratch works, we deploy tends to up to 100,000 records, and we still haven't run into those limits yet. So
yeah,
no issues from
more to
us.
come, right?
Yeah, more to come. More to come.
All right.
But a good
All
question.
right. No, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, definitely one of the things you guys need to consider if you really look into this direction.
Mm,
All right. All
awesome.
right. Yeah, I think it was very good, very good. Thank you, Peter. It was amazing. Thank you for your time. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
and looking forward for other sessions. Maybe once you implement it and we've got some more information, so we can meet again and discuss anything which comes out of it. Right?
that would be awesome. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for your time also, Ruslan. And thank you everyone
yeah,
for watching. I hope it was of value. And if it was fast, a lot of information, please rewatch it. And thank you.
yeah, totally. Thank you, everybody. Have a very good day, everybody. Bye bye.